Angelicus and Sperb. Thank you very much, and appreciate you coming to. I have special effects, so I'm going to use them. Coming to Sperb's Herbs. This is technically episode 19. I've skipped a few episodes, so I don't know what I'm going to do with the numbering system. But we're going to be talking about Suan, Ali Sativa, a bulbous, which is garlic bulb in standard terms. That's what we're going to be talking about today. I am, as always, your presenter, Dr. Greg Sperber. Let's get into it. So today we are, as always, if you're an acupuncturist, this podcast, as well as others, are approved for California Acupuncture Board continuing education units and National Certification Commission of Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine professional development activities at a very reasonable cost. You can find those at integrativemedicinecouncil.org. I have a new book coming out called Dragons in the Medicine Cabinet, Chinese Herbal Medicines Everyone Should Have at Home. And if you're interested in getting information about this book, please send me an email at drgreg@sperbsherbs.com. All right, so let's get into it. So I always promise something a little different whenever I do one of these podcasts. And that little something different is definitely the most enjoyable and daunting aspect of every episode. What the heck am I going to come up with as a little something different? There are always tons of possibilities, or sometimes there doesn't seem to be anything obvious. But then as I get into it, I figure it out. Today's topic lent itself to an absolute plethora of possible somethings different. Of course, when one thinks of garlic, they think of food, and many, many cuisines around the world employ the stinking rose. That's the nickname for garlic, but that was a little too on the nose, I thought. So then I thought of garlic and vampires, something a little bit different, but then I did a little research, and there's not much of a story there as far as I can tell. It is because it's smelly. Garlic just repels vampires, or it's antimicrobial. This is based on the fact that vampirism is an infection, and therefore this could cure the infection, or protects against blood-sucking mosquitoes, so therefore it would protect against blood-sucking vampires. Basically, that's it. That's it. Done. End of the story. That's all there is to talk about with garlic and vampires. All right. So that didn't work out really well. Then I thought about Chinese vampires, different and relevant. I thought, because we're talking about this from a Chinese perspective. My martial arts instructor talked to me about Chinese vampires, in quotes. These are real and are women trained to steal qi during intercourse. And he taught me a lot about that and how to prevent that and that sort of thing. So that's something that he says are actually out there. When I looked up Chinese vampires, there's a whole genre of Chinese vampires called jiangshi. Very interesting hopping vampires. That was my first Chinese of this podcast, and I always like to let everyone know that I've taken several years of Chinese. I'm still very bad at pronunciation, so please forgive my Chinese. They're very interesting. Hopping vampires are sort of, some people say they're more zombie than vampires, and others say they're more vampire than zombie, and it's really a fascinating sort of subgenre of vampires. But neither they nor the Chinese vampires of my martial arts instructor have anything to do with garlic, and therefore it was completely irrelevant to today's podcast. So I am back to food. Of course, I don't want to just talk about garlic in a generic way. We'll be talking about different types of garlic. And we'll talk quite a bit about one type of garlic I have actually been scared to try. I've seen it, and it looks scary to me, and it's called black garlic. We'll discuss what it is, how to use it, even how to make it. I'm excited. Let's get going. So there are 10 common types of garlic. There's give or take a few, and one very related type. The 10 types are broken down into two major subspecies, softneck and hardneck. Hardneck varieties, which are the subspecies Ophioscorodon or Ophioscorodon, and that's, so technically it's a subspecies, so it'd be Allium sativum Ophioscorodon. There we go. Typically have stronger flavors, larger cloves, and have a woody central stalk called a scape, which are frequently chopped to encourage growth in the bulb and are actually considered a delicacy when it's that time of the year. Some common varieties of these hardnecks include rocambole, purple stripe, marbled purple stripe, glazed purple stripe, and porcelain. And these are all varieties, cultivars, if you will. There are also varieties of weakly bolting or intermediate hardnecks, which do produce scapes just like the full-on hardnecks, but only in harsh conditions, under harsh conditions. So if it's super cold or something along those lines, then they will create a scape. And these include the Asiatic Creole and Turban varieties. This is considered the same subspecies as the other hardnecks. It's just they're not, the other hardnecks always produce a scape. These only sometimes produce a scape. And if you can see the PowerPoint, here is a picture of a garlic bulb with a nice green scape coming out of the top of it. Then we have the soft neck varieties, and this is subspecies sativum. So if that sounds familiar, that is the singular for the sativii. So this is actually Allium sativum sativum is the actual technical Latin name of this, which have a mild flavor, are not delicate. In other words, they're pretty strong, hard to screw up. They do not have a scape. That is where the soft neck comes from versus the hard neck. The hard neck is the scape. The soft neck is not the scape. And they have lots of cloves per bulb. So they have a lot more cloves per bulb than the hardscapes do. And these are what we are most familiar with in our markets, especially our supermarkets. You may be able to find some of the hardscapes and some of the other types in say, a farmer's market where they have a little bit more unusual produce. But when you go to the supermarket, get a big bag of it from Costco, then that is what we're talking about, are these soft neck varieties. And the two common types of these, at least in the U.S., are artichoke and silver skin. Those are the two varieties. So finally, there's another type of quote-unquote garlic. And this is called elephant garlic or buffalo garlic. It's the same. This is actually a different species. It's Allium ampeloprasum. And these have giant, very large bulbs, up to a pound each. A bulb has a pound. And they usually have a very small number of cloves, 4 to 6 cloves, a mild flavor, and is actually more closely related to leeks and onions than it is garlic. But it looks like garlic, and so we call it a garlic, and it's giant. So very, very interesting. So that's one other form of garlic. Not really garlic. The other two are garlic, but this one is called garlic. All right. So let's get into that black garlic. So what is black garlic? It is garlic that has been aged under specific temperature and humidity conditions to produce black cloves with a gummy texture and a lighter molasses-like flavor, at least molasses tones to it. It's supposed to have lots of health benefits as well. We're going to talk about how to make it, use it in recipes, find out if it has any specific health benefits different from regular garlic. If you can see the screen, there's a picture of it here, and you can see on this picture, there's a central stalk. So this is black garlic made from hardscape type of garlic. So there are several companies that sell black garlic and their derived products. Capsules, anyone? They actually encapsulate some of this, so you can actually take it internally for the health reasons, as well as really what it's used for a lot is cooking. It is supposedly very easy to make, and there are many recipes on how to do it, though they're all pretty similar. They start with either a slow cooker or a rice cooker. You place 6 or 7 clean bulbs in the cooker. To clean them, do not use water. That really screws up the humidity in all this. Just rub off any dirt with a stiff vegetable brush or the rough side of a clean sponge. And when we say rub off any dirt, we're actually talking about the bottom part where all the dirt and the little strings are. Rough that off, rub that off with a vegetable brush or rough side of a clean sponge. Set the slow or rice cooker to warm, not low. Make sure the bulbs are not touching each other and cover. And then you wait. You let it sit on the warm setting for 2 to 3 weeks, making sure the cooker has not switched off. And that's a key because a lot of these cookers will switch off on their own if you're not careful. So you do want to keep an eye on it. Apparently your whole house smells like garlic, especially for the first few days. And then after that, it becomes less so. And when it's about 2 to 3 weeks, you can start to test readiness by squeezing one clove. Well, first of all, you should look at it. It should be black. It should be a little loose. The skin should be a little loose on the clove. And then you can squeeze one clove. It should be spongy, soft, and chewy, similar to a date or a dried fig. And the only other thing to know is the inner cloves may take longer than the outer cloves to completely turn black into black garlic. After that, once you're all done with this, you can store it in an airtight container for up to 3 months and use it that way. Let's see how you can use it right now. So it can be used in place of garlic in almost any recipe, and it adds a lot of umami. If you're not familiar with this term umami, this is considered, we know the 5 tastes. We were all brought up knowing the 5 tastes: salt and sweet, saltiness and sweet, and bitter, and I don't remember what the other 2 are at this point. Well, there's a 6th one, and it came out of Japan originally, and that's why it's called umami. Umami is a Japanese term, and umami is sort of this flavor that enhances the other flavors. And so it's a really important sort of flavor when you're cooking to add umami. Things that add umami, first of all, we think of a lot of meat dishes have umami. The meat provides umami. Mushrooms are very good with umami. That's why mushrooms are a good substitute for meat in a lot of things. And things that are fermented often have a lot of umami. So soy sauce is said to have a lot of umami. So this black garlic, it is, what we've really done is kind of fermented the garlic. So it has a lot of umami and can add not just that garlic flavor and in an interesting way, but this umami flavor as well, which enhances the dish. So some interesting suggestions about using it include using it as part of a cheese or charcuterie plate on bruschetta instead of garlic, or in homemade vinaigrette, as well as almost any Chinese dish. So very good for substitution. Several chefs call it their secret weapon, and one said using it powdered is like magic dust on various dishes. In other words, you can use it on almost anything. So it's really a really neat thing to do. And we're going to find out that it's a milder flavor, and we're going to find out right now why it is a milder flavor. So health benefits. Black garlic is said to have twice as much antioxidant as standard garlic. So it's much more antioxidant than regular garlic. Allicin, the chemical that causes the distinctive garlic taste, is converted into bioactive alkaloids and flavonoid compounds, and has been demonstrated, at least in some studies, to have anti-allergic, anti-diabetic, anti-inflammatory, and anti-carcinogenic effects. So that allicin is sort of that normal bite we get with garlic, and so it is being converted to other substances. We're going to see a main one in just a second. And because it's converted, this black garlic doesn't have as much bite as we would expect. So continuing with health benefits, there was one study by Suan and others supports these claims and adds benefits to treat dyslipidemia. So if you have raised cholesterol or triglycerides, obesity, it actually was said to treat obesity, memory, so memory loss and memory issues, and the liver, it's supposed to be hepatoprotective as well. And most of these claims were substantiated through animal studies and should be taken with some skepticism, just to be honest about that. But still, it's pointing to a very interesting direction. And they further looked at this and found that many of these benefits are due to the enhanced breakdown of allicin and allein, which are very similar in the regular garlic, the raw garlic. And it breaks down into other similar compound. It breaks down to S-allyl cysteine, or SAC, and similar compounds when compared to garlic. And it's these SAC that has lots of different health benefits. And so more SAC, at least in the research, has shown that more health benefits. So that's where that comes from. So let's talk about an herbal legend about garlic in Suan. So this is from a nice little book that I picked up called 50 Herbal Legends, and they're little stories to kind of help explain, they're like folk stories about various herbs, and only 50 of them. There's a lot more than 50 herbs in the pharmacopoeia, so this doesn't cover everything, but Suan was number 50, so it was the last of the herbs that they talked about. So let's get into that story. A farmer, the neighbor of a doctor, was obsessed with medicinal herbs and asked the doctor if he would take him on as a student. The doctor declined, as in that period of time, medical knowledge was only handed down within one's family and never to outsiders. The farmer did not give up and knew the doctor was teaching his helper at night. So one night, the farmer stood outside the doctor's window and listened to the lecture. However, that night the doctor was talking about a bill a patient owed and not about medicine. From his perch, the farmer could not hear everything exactly clearly. When the doctor responded to an inquiry from his helper about interest on the payment, he said, "Not necessary, hold back the interest." However, the farmer thought he heard the doctor say, Suan can cure diarrhea. So this doesn't make a lot of sense in English, but I'm assuming it makes a lot of sense in Chinese, that these terms that are used are very similar. The farmer student had a chance to use his newfound knowledge and was able to cure a relative of his diarrhea by using garlic. He then set up a clinic in his relative's house, and soon many patients came to him to have their diarrhea successfully cured. When the doctor heard about this, he asked the farmer how he learned Suan could cure diarrhea, and the farmer replied that he learned it from him. When the farmer explained how he came about the knowledge, the doctor laughed out loud. All right, this is a good chance for, there we go. Not exactly a doctor laughing, but it's there. He laughed out loud and explained that they were talking about medical bills that night. The shocked farmer then asked, then why does Suan work so well for diarrhea? And the doctor replied, I must admit, you really have gotten some knowledge of medicine, so you may become my student. And he trained him. And hence, Suan became a member of the herb family. So a little story that explains some of the aspects of Suan and why it's important as an herb. All right. So let's get into some of the technical details about garlic and some more interesting aspects of it. So it comes from the family Liliaceae. Its medicinal part is the bulb, or even the cloves, if you will, in the bulb. Other names for Suan include, of course, garlic bulb, Taisan, which is Japanese, Taisan, which is Korean. Again, I don't know Japanese or Korean, so I'm maybe pronouncing those completely incorrectly. And then there's Suan, which is another Chinese term for this. Hu is an interesting term. It often means barbarian, which in herbs, that means it comes from without. Comes from outside of China. So this is a strange version of Hu. It's pronounced the same way, but it has actually a grass radical rather than, and the barbarian term does not. So it kind of means I guess you can interpret it as sort of an herb that comes from outside. It's a little bit of a strange term. May not be translatable. The dosage on it is usually 4.5 to 9 grams per day. Chen and Chen state that 3 to 5 pieces, and by pieces they mean cloves. So I don't know what an average clove weighs, so I don't know if that's similar. I would imagine they probably weigh about 1.5 to 2 grams each, so that's probably about the same dosing. The category is interesting because every book gave a different category for this herb. Bensky says it is an herb that expels parasites. Okay, well, I don't recall learning it in that thing, so that was a revision. So that is an interesting one. Chen and Chen state it is a substance for topical application. So it doesn't even talk about parasites. It doesn't even, in this grouping, it doesn't even say internally, even though some of the functions of it in Chen and Chen do talk about taking it internally. And Brandon Wiseman classifies it as a toxin-attacking, worm-killing, and itch-relieving medicinal. And we're going to see those all come up in its medical actions. So it's an interesting categorization of this herb. So it comes from the Allium genus, so Allium sativum or Allium sativum. So Allium is going to be the genus. Translated, this simply means garlic in Latin, but it includes perennials with true bulbs, many of which are found on rhizomes. So rhizomes are, of course, part of the herb, and not quite a root, but They go into the ground. And the odor and taste of onions or garlics, they all have that in common. They have been employed as food and medicinal substances for a very long time. So some examples of other species in this genus include onions, or Allium cepa, French shallots, Allium oceanini. Again, I don't know Latin, so please excuse my Latin here. Leeks, which is Allium ampilopressum, which was the same one that we had for the buffalo garlic. So it actually is a member of the leek family. Scallions, various allium species, and herbs such, of course, garlic, and chives, Alphium schoeneprosum, are all part of this genus. So you can see the similarities. They all have this sort of similar flavor profile because we eat a lot of this stuff. And we also know a lot of this is used for medicinal purposes as well. It is acrid and warm and enters the large intestine, lung, spleen, and stomach. This is from Bensky's book, Bensky and Pals. Chen do not include the large intestine as one of the channels it enters. And Brandon Wiseman agrees with acrid and warm, but states some sources say it's sweet and balanced. My guess is if anyone could say garlic is sweet and balanced, because anyone who tastes it, I think, would agree with spicy and warm. I think the sources that say it's sweet and balanced might be using different species or different types that are much more mild than what we've seen here. Good quality garlic is large, thick, and has a spicy taste. I guess that really doesn't help a lot when you're at the market trying to figure out what is a good quality garlic. Things I always look for are there's no shrunken cloves, there's no spots there's no black cloves in there, and it seems fairly smooth. Whenever I go and look for garlic in the supermarket, if it's loose garlic, you see a lot of people will poke their finger in, and so there's always like little cuts in it, and I don't know what that is about. I have a feeling it's some secret Italian way to find out what the best garlic. So, and of course, they do that and then leave it, so you're not getting the best garlic if they loved it. I have no idea, so I'm curious about that. So, according to Bensky, it was first described in the Bensao Jingji Ju, the collection of commentaries on the classic of the Materia Medica, written during the North and South Kingdoms period, which went from 420 to 589 CE. So that's a wide period of time. So sometime in there, this came out. Chen actually said it was first described in the Mingyi Zazhu, the miscellaneous records of famous physicians, in 500 CE. I think those are pretty, if 500 CE is right smack, actually it's right smack in the middle of the North and South Kingdoms period. So whether or which book it is, I'm not sure, but the timing is about the right. So 500 CE. Now that's kind of significant. That's a little bit later in herbal thinking in China. The Bensao, the Shendong Bensao Jing, which is kind of the first written book of individual herbs, was written during the Han Dynasty, which went from 200 years BCE to 200 years CE. If you're not familiar with, if it's been a while since you've been in school, BC means before the Common Era, and CE means the Common Era. We're supposed to use that instead of saying BC, before Christ, and AD, after death. It's the exact same thing, just different terms. I still think it's very Christian-centric, but that's where we're at. So the Shendong Bensao Jing is the first written record of that we have on individual herbs. So this is several hundred years after that. So that's quite a long period after that original herbal compendium. So outside of China, however, it was first described in Mesopotamian cuneiform records over 4,000 years old. So been around, used for a long period of time, both as food and medicine. So absolutely one of the quintessential herbs, especially in the West. So very interesting history with Da Suan. So what are its Chinese medical actions? Well, it's in that kill parasite, treat parasite category, according to Bensky. So it kills parasites. And when we talk about parasites, we're really kind of talking about worms and potentially some single cellular parasites. It disperses abscesses and reduces swelling. So again, that can be internally, but really we're probably talking about topically there. So we're bringing in that topically that Chen talks about. Reduces swelling again, relieves toxicity both internally and topically. So that is helpful. When in Chinese we'd say relieves toxicity, of course, we're often talking about infectious processes, viral or bacterial. That would be sort of the translation, not exactly. I don't want to do any equality here, but it kind of helps get our head wrapped around what is toxicity for people who haven't studied it. Warms the stomach, strengthens the spleen, promotes the movement of qi, and reduces stagnation. That's a lot of stuff that it does there. What we can get from it is warms the stomach, strengthens the spleen. That is really good for digestion. Those are both digestive organs. So that's where we kind of are starting to get into seeing that in that story we just heard about Suan helping diarrhea. This, especially a cold diarrhea, this would be very good for doing that. Promotes the movement of qi. When we look at acrid herbs, we often will say that they're dispersing, so they often move the qi, sometimes harshly. We're going to see we're kind of on the border of that with this herb. And reduces stagnation. So there's two kinds of ways to interpret stagnation. One is qi stagnation, and because it promotes the movement of qi, it does reduce qi stagnation. The other thing is this is also very good for relieving or reducing food stagnation as well, and that's a specific sort of condition in Chinese medicine. And we say there's actually often a physical sensation of food being stuck in our digestive system, but really it's a series of just, we've all had that, like, we've overeaten and we just feel off, like something's just not right and it's not moving. That's food stagnation. So this can help with that. It is good for relieving food poisoning, especially crab and fish poisoning. So it's often used with another herb that is totally blanking on it for fish poisoning. Used a lot in Japanese sushi. It's the little green leaf perilla, Folium perilla. I knew it would come to me eventually. And zisuye. And so that is really good for fish poisoning. And so the two together are actually quite good. It resolves toxins, kills worms, and checks dysentery. So again, all of those can cause a diarrhea type, different types of diarrhea. So it can actually be really useful for all that. And it can be and is often used with moxibustion for many types of conditions. We'll talk about a couple of those as we go through this. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box, send me an email, or just speak up. Okay. So, as quoted in Bensky, the commentary on the Divine Husbandman, so that's Shendong, Divine Husbandman is Shendong. So actually, Divine Husbandman's classic of Materia Medica is that Shendong Ben Sao Jing that I mentioned earlier, but this is a different book. This is the commentary on that book, which happened later than that book. So the commentary on the Divine Husbandman's, that is a hard word to say, classic of Materia Medica explains this herb. Acrid and warm, it travels and pierces, reaching everywhere, including the 5 yin organs. Its actions are best at unblocking and thrusting out through the orifices, expelling cold dampness, clearing away noxious pathogens, dispersing swollen sores, transforming gathered accumulations, warming the spleen and stomach, and promoting the flow of all qi. So it can do a lot with that. So that is a really good, that's a lot of things that this herb does. This is not an herb that we use a lot in Chinese medicine. I mean, I think it's used a lot in Chinese food for medicinal purposes potentially, but I've never just put this in a formula for a patient. I have used it for moxa. I've seen it used and have used it for moxa on occasion. So again, it does all these things, but it's not necessarily the best thing to do a lot of this, though it is unique in kind of how it puts these all together. Okay, I'm trying to think if there's anything important for me to explain there. Nope, I'm going to move on. So this passage goes on to warn, however, those who consume it every day do not know its acrid flavor can disperse qi, and its heat can assist fire, injuring the lungs, harming the eyes, and blurring the consciousness. It actually goes on in this passage. I didn't do it because it wasn't a quote, but it actually says it harms the spirit. It prevents spiritual, not attainment, but spiritual growth. So it's very interesting. There are definitely some negatives to this herb, in other words. It is also effective against hookworms and pinworms, though it should be combined with other herbs that treat intestinal parasites such as binglong, betel nut, Ariaceae semen. So that's the Ariaceae seed. Semen means seed. So the seed or betel nut. If you're not familiar with betel nut, this is in Southeast Asia, very, very common. That's what they're chewing. You'll see a lot of people often have red stains in the corners of their mouth or around their mouth, and that's because they chew betel nut. And if you think about it, there's a lot of parasites in that area, and so it's a very natural and good approach to dealing with it. And of course, I think the cuisines in that area also have lots of garlic as well, so very effective combination to prevent any sort of worms from occurring. Okay. So preparations, it can be sliced or mashed and used as a base for cone moxibustion. So if you're not familiar with cone moxibustion or moxibustion, I do have another Sperb herbs on Aya, which is mugwort, which is the bulk of what makes up moxa, which is burnt and used for moxibustion. And cone moxibustion is where we form that moxa punk, is what we call it. It's sort of a cottony form of moxa, and we form that into a cone and burn it. Place it on, in this case, over a slice or a mashed base of garlic, and put the moxa on top of that and burn it. And that can be useful for lots of different things. Since garlic is considered warming, it adds to the warmth of the moxibustion. It's also very useful for topical situations as well. So used for a lot of things. This one's an issue. Mashed, it can be applied around the anus to prevent pinworms or to areas that may be exposed to hookworms. So, wow. Okay. When steeped in vinegar and consumed regularly, it can fortify the spleen and warms the stomach, increasing the appetite and treating cold pain in the stomach. And of course, we can use it as we use most of our herbs. We can decoct it. So that is a whole nother way of using this, in the most traditional way of using this form, this herb. So really, there weren't any other combinations. It's a relatively rare herb that doesn't have a ton of combinations in any of the basic texts. We discussed the combination with binglong, and there really weren't any other major combinations to talk about. So that's kind of where we're at with combinations. So let's talk about the science. So Chen states garlic is anti-neoplastic, which means that it prevents cancer from forming. It is antibiotic, so it prevents it treats bacterial infections. It's antiviral, so it treats viral infections. It's anti-diabetic, so it helps diabetes. There's actually some decent research around that anti-diabetic effect. And it reduces blood pressure, blood cholesterol levels, and atherosclerosis, which of course is cardiovascular disease. Unfortunately, that was in various animals. They used dogs and rabbits and rats, I think, and they showed this pretty clearly throughout all this, which is interesting. And as well as protects the liver, at least in rats. I'm a little curious about how they did this, because one of the studies was in dogs, and yet I know that garlic is poisonous to dogs. So they must have been using some sort of extract of it that eliminated something that was poisonous to dogs. So, so there. In addition, they list some small studies, human studies, showing it can treat antibiotic-resistant I can't even say. I practice this too. Pneumoniasis. Right? It's a parasitic disease. Nephritis, so that is an inflammation of the kidneys. And alopecia areata. So alopecia areata is loss of hair, but it's not the male pattern baldness. It's when women have it, it's usually more of this areata, and it's areas. It's like rings or circles that become hairless. And to do this, you use it topically while ingesting the formula Sichuan Dabutang, which is another Sperb herbs we have. So if you want to know more about Sichuan Dabutang, that stands for the 10 great all-inclusive decoction. So it's a very tonifying decoction. Again, all these were small studies, but they were in humans, so that's important. So the contents of garlic. What is in garlic? Garlic has been heavily researched and hundreds of compounds have been discovered. Among the most important is allicin, which we've mentioned already, which gives garlic its smell and taste, as well as some of its health benefits. Combined with allantoridine, allicin is considered anti-neoplastic. So anti-neoplastic means it's that anti-cancer sort of thing. It also contains many derivatives of allicin, such as the aforementioned S-allyl cysteine, many of which have been shown to have strong health benefits. Now, I should have said earlier when we were talking about black garlic that S-allyl cysteine is much greater quantities. Like I've read about double what's normally in garlic, but there's a lot of that in garlic as well. So those same health benefits are in garlic. It's just a little bit stronger in the black garlic. So still very useful. Drug-herb interactions. There's lots of potential drug-herb interactions with garlic, and we do need to be aware of them. Garlic does induce cytochrome P450-3A4 NP-glycoprotein. So I don't generally go into a lot of this on Sperb herbs, but these are serious when we look at drug-herb interactions. There's three main things that we're looking at for drug-herb interactions. One is protein binding. One is cytochrome P450 interactions, and the other one is a narrow therapeutic index. Those are the three big ones. This is cytochrome P450-3A4 interactions inducing. When you induce CYP3A4, if there's a drug that requires its metabolism by cytochrome 3A4, cytochrome P450-3A4, then there is less of that. There's more of that cytochrome 3A4 there, so it gets metabolized faster than it would probably do normally without the garlic. And so that means the drug can actually go through your system potentially faster than it would otherwise. So it can create some drug-herb interactions with that, and that is a major point that we look at whenever we're looking at drug-herb interactions. P-glycoprotein is a little bit newer, and it kind of can affect a lot of different aspects of what we call the ADME scheme. But it is something to keep an eye on, and inducing P-glycoprotein is probably not as big of an issue as inhibiting it. So even though there's some potential drug-herb interactions with that inducing of P-glycoprotein, it's probably not a huge concern in this case, but we do need to be aware of it. However, in addition, there have been numerous interactions with specific drug classes and individual drugs that we do need to be aware of. And so I'm going to list just a few of them here. It may attenuate cholesterol-lowering agents, as shown in meta-analysis of human clinical trials. So that's a good one. So in other words, it helps the cholesterol lowering. It can make it even more so. So that's an issue. This is level B evidence, which is pretty strong. It goes A, B, C, D. So B is pretty strong. There's not a ton of A levels when we talk about drug-herb interactions. So level B is really strong evidence that it does that. It may attenuate anticoagulant and antiplatelet effects and should be used with caution in patients taking anticoagulant and antiplatelet agents, thrombolytic agents, and low molecular weight heparins. This is an expert opinion. Therefore, it's level D. It's the lowest level of evidence. However, I got to say, as an expert opinion, this is pretty widely agreed to. You know, it's sometimes these expert opinions are hard to study because to study them means we're going to cause harm in the participants. So you can't really study that. So I think there is a good case to be made for this. Usually, I'm not a big fan of expert opinions. I think this one is a little bit is a strong expert opinion is my point. So if any of if you or any of your patients are on any of these drugs, then you do want to be careful about adding a lot of garlic into that regimen. Suan may induce increased metabolism of protease inhibitors by inducing cytochrome P450 3A4. So we talked about the cytochrome 3A4 inducement. This is specifically talking about protease inhibitors. If you're not familiar with protease inhibitors, these are one of the mainline drugs used in HIV patients to control HIV and prevent AIDS from occurring. So this one's an interesting. Human studies on individual protease inhibitors showed no interference except for when large doses of garlic were used in combination with sequinavir in a small human study. So I think I pegged this at level D. Just the fact that there was a small human study, that means it's level C, at least for sequinavir. The rest of it, they were small, so it may not show any protease, any interference with the protease inhibitors, but at least theoretically it could. So, Suan attenuates anticoagulant and antiplatelet effects of indomethacin and dipyridamol in bench research. So bench research is always level D evidence. This can be important. Indomethacin and dipyridamol. Dipyridamol is an anticoagulant. Indomethacin is one of these weird drugs that kind of does a lot of things like aspirin, and it is an NSAID like aspirin is, a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, but it's also used in a lot of other things as well for a lot of other reasons. So useful to know. Again, low level of evidence to support it. Garlic may increase bleeding time due to its decreased platelet aggregation effect and should be used with caution when taking indomethacin, so that supports that. Other NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. And again, this is an expert opinion, level D evidence. Something to be aware of. If someone's on these drugs, you want to be a little bit cautious about. Not all NSAIDs are antiplatelet, though. So aspirin is, and the other salicylic acid derivatives are going to cause decreased platelet aggregation. The other NSAIDs probably don't, with the exception of indomethacin. There may be a couple in there as well, but most NSAIDs, this is probably not an issue, but a few of them there are. It may prevent hepatotoxicity from acetaminophen. So this is an interesting one. So acetaminophen is Tylenol. And I used to say to my students when I teach pharmacology, I'd always talk about, I said at the beginning, I'd warn them when we were talking about suicide and murder and all kinds of stuff in this class, so they kind of bring out some of the properties of some of these drugs. And acetaminophen was one of those that I would always say, if you really want to kill yourself, acetaminophen is the way to do it. Take a bottle of acetaminophen, you're going to be dead. Your liver is going to quit on you. You're going to die. The problem is it's going to be 2 or 3 weeks of absolute agony, and there's nothing anyone can do to reverse it. That may have changed since then, but it's been 20 years. I don't think there's anything to counteract it, but there might be better support options than there was. So that hepatotoxicity, and the reason why I'd say that is it really amplifies that hepatotoxicity that can happen from Tylenol. And so it said that fresh garlic may really help prevent that hepatotoxicity from acetaminophen. And so if you are going to take a lot of acetaminophen, maybe taking some garlic is not a bad idea. So what are some concerns about Suan? Contraindicated in yin vacuity with heat signs. This is a very technical Chinese medical term, yin vacuity with heat, and it makes sense because it's warming and it drains dampness that we see. It helps cold dampness, so it's going to warm things up and drain some fluids, and that's exactly what you don't want to have happen when your yin is low or your fluids are low and you have heat signs. It is a skin irritant, should not be applied topically for prolonged periods of time. It should not be ingested by those with problems of the eyes, by those with problems of the eyes, teeth, mouth, throat, or tongue. What it will do is, if you have any problems with that, it can kind of induce ulcers, things along those lines. Heat. I'll tell you my experience with garlic just briefly. I love garlic. It's absolutely one of my favorite flavors. I love garlic. The problem is it doesn't agree with me. I am someone who tends to be very warm. In general, I have sort of a damp heat constitution. And I find if I eat, I can have garlic and I can have small amounts of garlic, no problem. But if I take too much garlic, especially at night, I have insomnia that night. And I actually call it garlic insomnia. And I'm like up, sort of half up, half asleep all night long. I get horrible sleep, and it's from the heat of the garlic. So that's sort of going into some of these concerns as well. So topical application to the perianal area or enemas are contraindicated during pregnancy. So some books said it's perfectly fine to take during pregnancy. Others said you should be careful during pregnancy. I think contraindication was the term used in this book. I think a better word might be, rather than contraindication, might be caution during pregnancy. And one of the things that was clearly noted was that women who are breastfeeding will, when they take in garlic, they will change the flavor of their breast milk, even to the point where the baby will no longer suckle. So it can be a real concern. And I think generally they advise against eating lots of garlic while breastfeeding, at least in the U.S., you know. So there you go. Those are some concerns. The commentary on the Divine Husbandman's Classic of Materia Medica, which I quoted earlier, states, when the lungs and stomach have heat, the liver and kidneys have fire, or people have chi vacuity and blood weakness, this definitely should not touch their lips. So very interesting. Lots of different conditions. But what's common in a lot of these is heat. So the lung and stomach heat, the liver and kidney fire. Chi vacuity just means they don't have enough chi. So remember, this is acrid and it disperses. And so if there's not enough chi to disperse, you can cause some problems. And blood weakness. When you have blood weakness, we're starting to go down the road to yin deficiency and heat. So we don't want to weaken the blood further by taking this herb. So that's a lot of different concerns there. And that pretty much wraps up our class today. I wanted to tell you something that I've discovered more. I wanted to talk about it under the black garlic because I thought a really interesting use of black. So first of all, I didn't get into the black garlic. Let me talk about that just for a second before we say thank you. We have a few minutes here. I was scared of black garlic. I would look at it and I'm like, oh, that does not look good. It seems like it's like everything you're not supposed to eat. But after doing all the research on it and finding out, I am so excited about making it and using it. So I'm going to do all those steps. I think it's going to be I'm really looking forward to using it. One of the things I want to try with it is I've been experimenting with making the perfect garlic bread. And I read it. It was an article a couple months ago in our local newspaper, the San Diego Union Tribune. And what they suggested was when you do it, when you make garlic bread, use 3 types of garlic. And so what they recommended was roasted garlic. And if you've never had roasted garlic, it is to die for. And I find that even when I eat a lot of roasted garlic, I don't get that heat sensation. So I think the roasting of it really kind of breaks down a lot of probably the allicin. And so that's what I'm reacting to a little bit. So I find that I can have some roasted garlic where I couldn't before. And it's easy to do. You just put, cut off the tops of a clove, wrap it in tin foil, but before you close it up, just put a few drizzles of olive oil on it. And it doesn't matter the temperature, 350 degrees, 450 degrees. You can't burn it. You want it caramelized, and you just do that for anywhere from a half an hour to an hour. And it comes out amazing. Then you squeeze out the paste of the roasted garlic. So use that on your garlic bread. Use garlic powder as well as raw garlic. That will be cooked a little bit as you do it. And you do all 3. And my friends have just gone ape crazy over this garlic bread using all 3 of the garlics. And I'm really excited about trying the black garlic in this recipe. Maybe make it 4 garlics rather than just 3 garlics. It might be a complete bomb, but I'm excited to give that a shot. So I wanted to mention that and do that. I'm hungry right now. It's a couple hours after lunchtime, and I really want to try some black garlic. So there you go. So that's our whole thing. That's our podcast for the day. Thank you very much. Just remember, when you buy from Amazon, please use the banner ad on our homepage at spurbsherbs.com. That helps us continue to do these things and have the podcast out there. If you do have any questions, you want to get in touch with me, you can always email me at drgreg@spurbsherbs.com. That's SPERBSHERBS.com, or at our website, www.spurbsherbs.com. So that's all easy. Thank you very much. And if you're looking at the slides, I have, as usual, a relatively extensive bibliography. I'm a big fan of writing down everywhere I get this information from. So a couple pages of a bibliography. We're a little bit early, not too early, but a touch early. So if anyone has any questions, if you want to put them in the chat box or unmute yourself, happy to answer any questions you might have. And we can go from there. Otherwise, call it Sperb Herbs. The proceeding was presented by Dr. Greg Sperber. We would like to thank Janelle for all her support and everybody else who contributed to this program.
Janelle,
Timothy Dobbins,
Rogers,
Campbell.